Hello, and thank you for your interest in this video from SMI Advisor. My name is Justin Volpe, and I'm a peer support coordinator at NASMHPD, the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. Today, joining me is my colleague, Philip Cooper.
Hey everybody, I'm Philip Cooper. I go by Change Agent Cooper, and I'm the Chief Change Agent at Operation Gateway, which is a community-based organization that's providing boots on the ground services for people who are returning home from prison. I'm also the founder of Voices of Afro-Latia. Yeah, that's right, Afro-Latia. I'm a Black leader in the Appalachia. You get it, Afro-Latia? But I'm the founder of Voices of Afro-Latia, which is a state-funded initiative that has been implemented in this area to address the behavioral health stigma in the communities of color.
That's really impressive, Philip. I think today, based on your experience, I think we'll be talking about culturally relevant reentry services and peer support services. How does peer support and culturally specific services affect this population you serve?
Well, for you to truly understand my take on this, I want to take you back just a little bit and say, like, I'm a person who chose the streets because I grew up in poverty. And the people that I was around that I thought were successful, or what I had identified as being successful, those people were drug dealers. And I chose that way of life. I also started using the drugs, and my whole life was messed up because you can't be selling drugs is bad enough, but you can't be trying to sell the drugs and use the same drugs you're selling. A rapper, the late Notorious B.I.G. once said, "Never get high on your own supply." So I was ruining my life, Justin. And I ended up in prison, and prison saved my life because I was addicted to the drugs. When you talk about culture, like in my culture, it's taboo to even be on the drugs. You sell the dope, you don't do the dope. And so for me, I was like the outcast amongst outcasts. And whenever I went to the penitentiary, that was when I had my spiritual awakening, as we talk about in the recovery community. And so in prison, I worked as a peer counselor. I had a job. It was one of those $1 a day jobs. Those are the good jobs when you get paid $1 a day. And I was a peer counselor for the A New Direction program. And when I was in there, I found my calling. And so when I got out of prison, I said I wanted to get into the field, and I transitioned into the behavioral health field, working as a behavioral health tech, then moving to a case manager, and really going hard into the peer support workforce once it started to take off in Western North Carolina. So let's talk about culturally relevant. We have to understand that different cultures see addiction, they see mental health in different ways. In some communities, you can't even talk about it. So we got to understand, like, a person that's not participating in treatment or a person that's not vibing with the clinician, it doesn't mean that they don't want help. It just may be that they don't know how to communicate what they need or how they feel to a person that they believe works for a system that they don't trust. It's important in the reentry space because a lot of people make it to prison, like myself, because we self-medicate untreated mental health conditions, you see? And so a person ends up in prison, and then they don't have the drugs, they don't have the substances going into their bodies. A lot of times people even get reconnected to mental health medications. Some people come off medications and self-medicate prior to going to prison, and then they get back on medication or back on whatever it was before while they're in the penitentiary. And so now as they reenter society, they have to have someone, that trusted person, to meet them where they're at. And that's where the reentry services come in at. Like, people coming out of prison it's easier for them to be humble than it is for a person who's already living a life of crime. And so a person coming out, when we at Operation Gateway, when we assess a person's needs, we ask them, have you ever had mental health challenges? Did you have struggles with addiction? And before we ask those questions, we share our own personal stories, which makes it possible for a person to trust this situation and establish that rapport. But I mean, that's the power of peer support. We've been in their shoes before. I even give you an example. There was a time, it was a brother that was sitting in my office. Initially, he didn't talk about his substance misuse problems, but I share my story. I share a little bit of my story with folks. And so when we get to talking about it, then he say, you know what, bro, I'm going to be honest with you. I was messing around, getting my nose dirty. I was popping some pills too, man. You know what? Because I know you ain't gonna judge me. Because I mean, and I appreciate you sharing your story with me. I know you ain't gonna judge me. That's the way it happens, Justin. And that's why it's so powerful. And that's why it's important for us to understand the value of culturally relevant, culturally responsive, right? And understanding the value of reentry when we're talking about that time in their life being the time that's the change agent for them doing the right thing. So we have to make sure that we connect them with all the resources in that reentry experience. And we definitely have to remember that reentry starts before the person gets out of prison.
Amazing, Philip. Amazing. And you are quite a change agent, I must say. What was this approach there for you when you went through this? Did you experience this firsthand?
No, sir, I didn't. Not coming out. And I love my dad. Like, I love my dad so much. My dad's a Vietnam veteran, and he's also in recovery. When I got out of prison, I stayed with my father, and he's a single man with a dog and a 4-bedroom house. And you know, I came home to basically living in the house with an extra probation officer. I basically had a live-in probation officer. I didn't have a peer that came alongside me though. I didn't have someone showing me how to navigate the mental health resources. I didn't have people telling me that, hey, if you admit that you have that anxiety disorder, that you can go down to vocational rehabilitation and they'll have additional resources that's going to support your workforce development journey. I didn't have anyone telling me that, Justin. I didn't have anybody that was really around my age that had came home from prison and prioritized going to the recovery meetings post incarceration. A lot of people would go to the meetings when they was in prison, maybe to get coffee or to get out of the dorm for a little bit, but they don't keep that same energy when they got out of prison. For me, I had to because I know I'm a person that has addictive characteristics, an addictive personality, a person who has the disease of addiction. And I understand that the opposite of addiction is connection. So I knew it was integral for me to have the first stop after I got out of prison and get settled in at home. I needed to make sure my behind was in a recovery meeting. So as it relates to peer support services for reentry, there was no peer support services for reentry when I got out of prison. I wish there was though.
So you're filling that gap now and you're stepping up, creating a service that you needed and other people need in the community, in your community and all communities. I
Mm-hmm.
worked in Miami-Dade County for 15 years, getting people out of jail with serious mental health and co-occurring issues. And I was a peer support specialist, and I would meet people as they were released from jail, have clothes for them, have food, have all the stuff they needed to get settled, and then transport them to where they were going, whether it be a homeless shelter, a house, a three-quarter way house, a halfway house. And then part of that service was that I would connect, and other peers that we worked together with would connect with people once they got out to make sure they didn't go back, and that, you know, keeping them on the right path, helping them, supporting them, sharing our stories, doing whatever we could to keep people from being reincarcerated again. And you know, it's meaningful, and it's a valid effort, and it's lacking you know, in a lot of systems. And I you know, I commend you for the work that you do, and you know, filling that void. um but it comes with a lot of stress too. I don't know if you can
Mm-hmm.
relate to that, Philip. You know, doing some of the work, having that firsthand lived experience, you of all people know the priority and the stress that comes with when people aren't linked to services. So what are some things you do for self-care in this process?
Oh man. So that word self-care, that's something that I had to learn over time. Cause like I'll tell you, when I first got out of prison and I got a job working at the crisis stabilization unit, as I had mentioned, the behavioral health tech job, I was trying to save the world. Like I had found purpose in my career because I didn't know what I was gonna do, Justin. I had sold drugs, I had failed in college, so I didn't know what I was gonna do for a career. And when I found something that was so rewarding, I overdid it and I worked, picking up shifts, work, had a second, second job. And so what I did was I burned out. I burned out. And I had to switch it up for a while. I had to leave from working full-time in the behavioral health space because I wasn't practicing self-care. I understand the value of self-care now. What it looks like for me now, Justin, is I'm making my meetings. I'm meeting with my sponsor. I'm in the gym. I'm in that gym and I'm taking care of my health. Now I have me a cheat meal. Having me a cheat meal weekly is self-care after eating all them egg whites. Good God Almighty. I will say that self-care looks like waking up in the morning, and before I go to the gym, I pray and I read my devotional and I sit and meditate. And the way that I meditate, I typically iron clothes. So I like to iron. My wife hates to iron. I love to iron. So that's when I'm ironing the family's clothes, that's when I do my meditation. So I pray, read my devotional, and then I have my meditation time at the ironing board. And if you see my social media, you'll see several posts where I say deep time at the ironing board. That's that moment. And I have to be consistent with that. That's kind of like an inventory process for me as well. And you hear people in recovery oftentimes talking about an inventory. Inventorying is a major component of self-care, Justin. I'm telling you. Like, people get overwhelmed when they're not paying attention to how their body is trying to tell them they're feeling. And so I have to be intentional about those moments when it's just me. You know what I'm saying? Even though it might just be 15 minutes. 15 minutes is a lot of time for you to just be sitting with yourself, praying, reading a devotional, and meditating. You dig? So self-care is like working on healthy boundaries, learning how to say no. That's one of the things I'm working on now, is working on saying no, because it's always been yes, because it feels good to be needed. When you've been that person that nobody wanted to see coming, that nobody wanted at the party, that people thought you was going to be up to something, and now you're that person they're saying, hey, can you help me? So it can be overwhelming. So I have to be intentional about setting healthy boundaries. But I also have to be intentional about strategic planning. For me, self-care looks like strategic planning, because I don't want people to see me as the answer. It's time to build a team, because that's the only way to sustain the good work that's doing. It's got to be a team effort. And as a peer support, I'm qualified in this profession by my recovery. So as soon as I'm not taking care of my recovery, I'm no longer qualified to do this job, because I'm teaching people how to engage in recovery and how to reinvent themselves by way of recovery. I got to practice what I preach. And so for me, self-care looks like continuing to stay engaged in my pathway of recovery and modeling what that looks like, because we as peer supports, that's what we do. And, one of the things that I learned in the recovery community is that, the only way to keep what I have is by giving it away. Another thing that I learned is, the broader the base, the higher the point of freedom. And so it's really about empowering others, because they're going to in turn need to charge my battery sometimes. And so for me, self-care looks like making sure I got the right kind of people in my circle. I got to be selective about who is in my circle, especially if I value my recovery. Because the recovery principles tells me, that the people that are in my circle are people who can hold me accountable. And for somebody to hold me accountable, they got to be also walking their talk. And so, yeah, man, the team plays a major role. It plays a major role in my recovery, but it also plays a major role in self-care, because self-care for me looks like spending time with my team doing recovery-related activities. And it ain't got to have nothing to do with the job, but all about recovery.
Yeah, I think that the relationship you have with people in recovery, and when you're doing the work and you're helping out, it could be a good foundation, like you mentioned. So, within working as a team and you've been established for a while now, how does peer supervision fit into the reentry space?
Well, that supervision piece is one that I've had talks, conversations with different bodies, governing bodies, and it's one that we definitely need to get in solidarity about with this profession. With supervision, it can get tricky, but we got to remember that our profession as peer supports is different from any other profession. We're qualified by our recovery. Our recovery is what qualifies us to have this job, So with me and the team, whenever I'm meeting with them, we're not just talking about things that are related to the members that we're serving. For lack of better description, I say a peer supervisor is a recovery coach for their team. That's what I would say. Because at the end of the day, a recovery coach is a person that's providing more. Peer supports are providing direction. Let's make space to say that. Peer supports are modeling behavior, coming alongside a person, helping them establish goals and everything, but they're mutually accepted goals. When you're supervising somebody and they're working for a company or an organization, you have to do certain things. It's a little different. It's a little different. So you're getting coached. And what I've noticed is for peer supports, especially some of the newer ones that's coming in the field, it's more of a level of coaching for them to help them understand like how to navigate working in a field that is all about your recovery, And so with the peer supervision piece, I like to say that it's important that the supervisor of a peer support also needs to be a person in recovery, because we're going to be talking about recovery. And if you look at the traditional supervision model, HR would probably go off. They go crazy if you knew you was talking to somebody about their recovery. It's typically not something that you're going to talk about with your staff. But when you're a peer supervisor, recovery is the center of everything that we do. We're qualified for this profession by the evidence of sustained and successful recovery. So professional development looks like recovery being the center of whatever it is we're talking about, but whatever it is we're doing. We're talking about meetings. Like with my team, I tell my team you can make two. I ask them to make 2 recovery meetings on the clock. 2 of their recovery meetings is on the clock. Therapy appointments on the clock. Because what qualifies you for this job is your recovery. So to maintain this profession and going to your meetings and therapy, that's professional development in my eyes.
Yeah, and that approach toward recovery, toward a trauma-informed care organization would work for any organization outside of peer support and peer support supervision. I mean, it just makes good business to let people take good care of themselves and to continue down the right path and have open conversations and transparency. It's when we have to hide stuff that, that benefits us. It messes things up with jobs. And I think that, if jobs all around valued self-care, the workforce would be in a much different space, especially the behavioral health workforce outside of peer support specialists. Well, Phil, I think we've talked about a lot today. How can peers, connect people to resources in the community? How does that work with you and your experience?
Well, I'll say that the lived experience piece holds so much weight because we can let people know about what behavioral health agencies they can work with where we have connections already been made. Because with us being out in the community and networking, we're able to, in a way, vet the best places for people to go. So the peer support stands in the gap and connects people to the resource. We don't replace the resource, but we improve access. I'll give you an example as well. It's like even with food, when people getting out of prison, and it's time to apply for their food stamps, if they have a certain drug charge, they can't get food stamps because of the drug charge. So peer supports we have that wealth of knowledge, so we're able to be proactive in making sure that our people have food. And we assess needs once again before they're released from prison. We have to start reentry services before a person is released. And that peer support is so powerful for that individual that's about to get out, that's starting to feel all of this anxiety. And then all of a sudden they're connected with a person within their last 90 days. This person is saying, hey, I've re-entered society myself. I know how it feels. We just need to know what all resources you need so we can start working on making those things happen. And then that person starts to have a decrease in their anxiety. They have an increase in their optimism, and the peer support spirit is fed because they have now slayed stigma for a person that's coming back home from prison back to society. It's a beautiful thing. I think about it a lot when I'm ironing clothes, to be honest with you, because sometimes when I'm doing my meditation, I'm also reflecting on gratitude, because gratitude is one of those main principles in recovery that we have to stay close to so that we don't get to the point to where we stop doing those things that we know kept the fire burning in our recovery. So yeah, man, got to have that deep time at the ironing board for meditation and reflection.
Thank you so much for sharing that with me and talking about these important topics today. And for anyone watching this video, I hope this helps you find support for yourself as a peer specialist or understand how we can best support peers in their important work. If you need more resources around peer support, please visit smiadvisor.org. You can find free education, hundreds of free resources, and a consultation service that lets you submit questions and gets answers from national experts. Phil, thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
Peace. Thanks for having me.